Hey, I'm Larissa.
And I'm Rebecca.
And we are creatives coming alongside you to learn and grow on our journey to success.
And this is Broke at the Oscars.
Amen.
You're supposed to do that at the end. We've discussed this.
We've discussed this.
I was trying to say that with as much disgust as possible. We've discussed.
Oh, that makes sense.
That was a bit of a stretch.
Right.
But anyway, welcome back, everyone.
Welcome.
We're excited you're here. We're excited to be here. And you know who else we're excited to have here?
We have a guest!
Right in my headphones.
Sorry. Welcome, Micah Gerber, to the stage.
Welcome.
Oh, I'm on a stage now?
Well,
you are.
It's
Wow.
It's
yeah.
not
An
pedestal
ethereal
and everything.
stage.
an ethereal
Yep.
stage. A stage in our hearts.
Well, yes.
Okay.
Hopefully I don't have stage fright. This could be terrifying.
Oh no.
Oh,
Yeah.
boy.
Just
don't think about
be
it.
natural.
Just
I'm behind the scenes, right? I'm a producer. That's how this works.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. You're not
Yes.
blinded by
but
the
now
lights.
you're in front of the camera.
And it's your turn to speak.
So speak your truth, I guess.
My goodness, this is like super
A train
weird.
wreck.
I don't know what this is right now. But
Well,
Micah,
Yes.
Oh,
go ahead.
yes. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell us what you do in the industry.
So I have a very unique role in the film world of being a producer. A
Amen.
producer's goal and basically purpose in the film industry is to cast a vision and bring a team together. How I fit into that is I'm a very unique producer in that I specialize in funding and distribution, which means I focus on the front end of the film before most stuff is even, basically before anybody's been hired.
Yeah.
And then the back end of the film, when everybody's at home, you know, chilling, waiting for the film to come out,
Right.
I'm at work. So that's kind of where I've started to focus more. I've been producing for a long time.
Wow. Nice.
But I didn't realize I was producing. I called myself so many other things before I was like, okay, quit lying to yourself, Micah. You're a producer, and that's where your value is. That's where you find joy. That's where your excitement is. So that's basically a summary. Anything else is just gonna get into nitty gritty that doesn't need to be discussed.
Well, cool. Well, speaking of nitty gritty, let's jump in.
We're getting in there.
We're gonna get a little nitty gritty.
Okay.
Maybe, I mean, to a degree, you know, we only have like an hour or whatever, so I'm sure this will be somewhat bird's eye view because we're talking about, you know, you do a lot of work like on films and stuff. So, but yeah, could you just walk us through a little bit of like, I guess, kind of the basics of your pre-production process? Like, how early are you, you know, hiring a director? Like, I assume that's probably, you know, one of the first people you hire, but like, yeah, how are you collaborating with people to, you know, hire all the different departments and like, yeah, just bringing all the different people and things together that you need to make a movie? If you could just walk us through that process a little bit.
Right. So I have this fun thing that I usually talk about. So the standard stuff you learn in college, the stuff that you normally, if someone was saying, hey, this is my role, they would talk about pre-production, production, and post-production, right? The thing is, for the most part, I'm not involved in any of those things.
Okay.
So I'm involved in the two that aren't talked about, which are development and distribution.
Nice.
Gotcha. Okay.
So basically where I fit in is in development. Someone goes and creates a script.
Yep.
That could be something where I've created the story idea. That's how I've worked a lot of times, where I found the story idea. I've developed some sort of an outline, gone and gotten a screenwriter to write it. Then we go find funding. Then we're able to go and hire our above the line people like our director, producers, you know, further producers, line producers, things like that. That then, once you've done the above the line people, you're able to start working on pre-production, which is the couple of weeks right before the film starts. It's the area that no one talks about. And the fun part of that is that's where my job kind of gets passed on to a line producer. And a line producer will then take the budget that I've been working on since square one, the funding that I've raised, the stuff that I pulled together for this development process, and he'll go and actually, or she, I guess it could be any.
Yes.
There's multiple.
Yes, indeed.
Yep, it's 2021, so
She.
yeah.
Well,
powerful.
yeah. So they'll go and actually put that to the test, whether it'll actually work. So my job in development is to make sure that I'm creating a feasible budget, which creates an actual, feasible funding campaign. Because a lot of people, when they think about funding, they start talking about, oh, we're going to go and crowdfund. Well, that's a campaign. But they don't quite think about going towards investors, donors, whatever it is, as a campaign. And that there needs to be a structure and a similar community building relationship structure that you would with a Kickstarter or something like that. So a lot of times where I'm going is I actually talk about this in I think it's an hour-long piece. Yeah, that I normally do. It's called the Pencil and Paper Movie. So it's creating your movie before you actually shoot it.
Nice.
It's before pre-production. It's before all these things to know whether your movie actually works, which is how you can actually sell it to distributors,
right,
so that you can actually get money.
Right.
This is how Pixar does it. This is how all the major players basically do it, that haven't gotten into their own heads and decided that they don't need support structures. But like some of those things in that Pencil and Paper Movie is having a solid script written before you ever start hiring a director or someone like that. People really step into that way before they should. I've been on multiple movies where they didn't have a script, period. Like didn't have a written out script. And we were about 2 days away from shooting.
No.
Yikes.
So these are rough times. Like that. And it gets worse and worse the more you're in indie productions. The larger productions have a lot more rules and regulations saying, well, you have to have a script because we're SAG or we're PGA. So those are going to have a few more of those regulations, but even then it slips by. So first step for me in that method is that you're really creating a solidified script. Then you're moving into a solidified budget structure so that you can modify that script to what your resources are feasible.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Because the last thing I want to encourage screenwriters. And if a screenwriter is constantly hampered by the fact that, well, I'm producing myself, they're going to run into writer's block. They're going to run into a lot of things because their creativity is constantly being hampered.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I can come in and allow them to write a very creative and amazing script, that then I can go in and just say, hey, can we shoot it this way?
Yeah. Like give options instead of telling them no from the get-go.
Right.
Yeah.
And then feasibly moving that into, okay, let's actually create this so we have something to show. That comes in storyboards. If you're the movie Parasite, you went and actually shot it on an iPhone or something, some sort of phone, and went and edited it all together, watched it back, and was like, wow, that works. And so when you actually go into production, you can shoot it much quicker because you don't have the deliberation.
Yeah.
You don't have the stuff on set where you're like, well, does this work? Does this not work? This was an ethereal idea in my head and it just doesn't work in this space.
Right. Yeah.
You've tested it, you've tried it, it works.
Yeah.
You have the resources, you need the handbag that somebody, you know what pistol this person's supposed to be holding for this shooting scene. You know what, all these things.
Yeah.
That's where, so a lot of people talk about storyboarding and they're just like, well, you're just kind of sketching out the general movements, or a stick figure works. This is where I'm like, no. Because if you've never made a movie before, yes, to some extent, starting with a stick figure is great because you're understanding, a movement, and maybe you need that to be able to remember. But once you get into a higher level of production, you remember that stuff. You know how the camera is going to move. You know a lot of that stuff. What you don't know are the details. How many things are supposed to be in this frame? What's his
Mm-hmm.
facial, what's his emotion in this?
Yeah.
What's his, what have we thought through? What is the frame supposed to feel like?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine, who's actually the storyboard artist for the Coen brothers,
Wow.
was just pounded that into me. He's like, your storyboard needs to look as close to the actual movie as possible, because if it doesn't look that way, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say don't do a storyboard if you can't draw. That's just saying, like, work through, like, that's part of, and I throw it into development. Some people throw it into pre-production. J. Todd throws it into development more so. It's a foundation. Your director needs to be involved heavily with it, but your initial like sketch for it, it doesn't necessarily require a director, but a director and executive producer usually come on at a similar time. So
yeah,
it's usually not too much of a problem.
Nice.
Would you would probably want your DP on at that point too to talk through, because I mean if the director and executive already have the shots, like exactly we're going to shoot exactly this, so I'm wondering, would you want your DP in on that to talk about, framing, angles, camera, lighting, and like her view on how to shoot?
DPs don't like storyboards very much from my experience.
Okay.
So a DP rarely is going to want you to want to be a part of that.
Okay.
Because they find it useless.
They're
Because
just gonna show up and
just
shoot it how they want to anyway,
right, to some extent. So it's a battle of creativity. What they want to see are your mood boards, things like that. They give you the color profile.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I have to remember, because I look at DPs and I'm like, wow, they have a ton of value, right? They're director of photography, but they're still under the director.
Yeah, right.
And so the director is the creative vision, and the producer is the initial vision that is, then he's handing it off to the director. The director's then taking that vision, handing it off to a director of photography. The director of photography is then passing it on to a gaffer, who's then passing it on to a grip or juicer or whatever, and then they're going and setting up a light. The director's passing it on to an actor, the actor's then performing it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interpretation that has to occur. And to have a framework and a groundwork with fewer people involved is a great place to start. That's not to say it's not going to change.
Right.
But it needs to have a framework and groundwork. And part of the reason why you go and you do storyboards and stuff like that is because it helps you to create a creative vision for your budgeting.
Okay.
Because like I had a film, and you can actually watch it on Roku, I think it's on now.
Oh, nice.
It's called Blindfolds.
Okay.
But it's a film. I'm not saying that it's good. Don't no one take that. But I got passed on a project from a guy named Sean Kish. He's a really great composer, spectacular composer. And he told me, he was like, I got this story called Blindfolds. Micah, would you read it? I read it and thought it was amazing. Not that the writing was necessarily amazing initially or that the story was perfect, but I was like, this concept is something I want to shoot.
Nice.
So we started working on editing and bringing this about. But the problem is he had this, I say a problem. It was an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
That we had this crazy idea of basically the story was set in like downtown New York. It's a short film. It's like 8 minutes long. Okay. So it's set in like downtown New York. There's a donut like food stand kind of deal.
Yeah.
There's this huge scene with like 100 extras where you walk across this, street and all that stuff. And I read this and I was like, well, this is really cool. This is totally not feasible to shoot as a short film.
Yeah.
With no budget, at least.
Well, yeah, well, we had nothing to, even with a budget, to be able to shut down a street in New York
Yeah.
for a short film,
Yeah.
one scene in a short film, they're never gonna do that.
Yeah.
Like, they're not gonna be. You would have to pay them so much money. It's not
Yeah.
even. It's
Oh
just
boy.
never gonna happen. Um, especially with 100 extras. It's
That's
anyway.
crazy. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So you have to, yeah, you have to have credentials and stuff to be able to do that. And I was like, this is not gonna work. So we ended up shooting it in a small town, like really small town, and we actually didn't shoot the scene with 100 extras because we just didn't think it was needed.
Hmm.
Um, looking back on it, it wasn't needed. It could have been. It would have added a level of like bigness to the production,
Yeah.
but I don't think that's the point of a short film.
Right.
So anyway, we basically shot it completely different from what was the initial concept.
Wow.
But again, he had this creativity spurt, right? He had just this great idea and vision
Mm-hmm.
that then got honed by a budget and by planning out storyboards and shot lists and hey, can we shoot this in a small town? And can it be a pastry shop? You know, in this small town versus or like a bake shop instead of and you know, we talked about coffee shops and we talked about all these things, and a lot of these things people discuss in pre-production, right? But the reason they're discussing them in pre-production is because they didn't discuss them in development.
Yeah.
And so instead of a lot of times in pre-production, instead of spending the time they could be spending doing production design, they're spending it trying to find a location that works.
Yeah.
And so in development, the more you can develop a feasible option, so it's like, okay, what's the most accessible thing? Well, we know this person it has way less business traffic than this person. Does it work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does this fit the story? Or does it have to be a coffee shop? Does it have to be a donut, you know, truck of some sort?
Yeah.
You know, all these things are very, you know, things that seem like, well, those are things a first AD deals with, right? Because a producer planned out that concept at some point. Bad producing comes from like producers look bad because they haven't done that work. And so a first AD ends up doing a lot of producing. UPMs do a lot of producing
Yeah.
because the development hasn't occurred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you talk with someone like the Coens, that's all happening way before a first
Yeah.
AD is even discussed.
Yeah.
Well, what about when you're so say you know you're coming at it from the perspective of okay, we're developing our script as it's kind of in its early stages of writing. And a lot of times people, you know, companies will just buy scripts that are already like fully drafted, fully basically production ready. But then so in that case, would you bring on, you know, a script editor to come on and like adjust those things because then you're dealing with not just what's feasible for our budget, but what's essential to the story, to an already fully formed written story. So if it's, you know, essential that it's a coffee shop versus a donut shop, you know, you'd have to discuss those things, and it might even need like a whole new like story drafting or script drafting to change that kind of stuff. So what's your view on that kind of thing?
So very rarely does a purchase script just hand off and
Yeah.
there's no involvement from the original screenwriter.
Mm.
That's very rare, partly because screenwriters very rarely want that.
Oh, okay.
They want to still be involved, I feel like. I mean, maybe there are screenwriters that just write it and hand it off and are
Right.
like, do whatever you want.
Yeah, no.
I mean, that's sort of what Sean did.
Involved,
I mean, Sean did sort of tell me, he was like, hey, do whatever you need to do, make it happen, you know, make it so. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was just kind of, he did say that, but he trusted me and that's why. So
It was a collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I always asked him. I never wrote anything
Okay.
on that project. He wrote every word involved. I just sat down and was like, okay, story wise, does it have to be this way?
Mm-hmm.
Is it imperative that it's a donut, or in the final film, it was a cupcake? Doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter at all. But screenwriters oftentimes get it in their head that it does matter.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was easy working with Sean because he didn't have that mindset, and he just was like, sure, it can be a cupcake, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, in the film, I think that, it just depends because
Yeah.
screenwriters are very attached to their ideas.
Especially if the screenwriter then becomes the director and the producer. Be like, oh no.
Producer director role is one thing that I like separating. But if you talk to a lot of producers, they actually like combining those two because they find it easier because it centralizes all the idea workflow.
Yeah.
So vision doesn't have to be communicated. I find that to be kind of limiting the production personally, because the whole point of film is that you're re-editing the story every step of the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're editing the movie, you're rewriting the movie.
Yeah.
If a screenwriter hands the production, they're handing it off to a producer.
Right.
The producer's then handing it to the director. Each of those times, the story's getting re-edited.
Yeah.
Because it's going through a different person's mind.
And hopefully for the better.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if at any point that you get too attached to the production and say, this is mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to have trouble.
Yeah.
Which is what we see all the time in movies.
Yeah.
If you've ever been on set, you see that and you're just like, yeah, that makes complete sense. And I don't like it when I hand it off to a director, I want their creative vision to come out.
Yeah. You want them to take control of it almost.
And if I don't trust them to do that, then there's a greater problem. Right? And so if you can, learning to trust in a creative space is extremely, like, if that's one thing that everyone could learn, is just learn how to trust people.
Yeah.
That's very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to do. But it's something that's very rare. If you find a trusting person in the film industry, you probably want to work with them.
Yeah.
That's really
and
good.
Trust is so important, and also I think understanding that each person brings their expertise to it, because kind of to your point, like you were talking earlier about writers who try to like produce themselves, and like kind of you can be too limiting in like an initial phase of writing. Like I've in just the tiny bit of screenwriting that I've done, none of which has like gone anywhere or done anything, but like that was something that I felt because I was like so in my head about what would be practical to shoot. But it's like you need to understand that that's not necessarily your job. Like your job is to tell a good story if you're the screenwriter, and then to be able to trust an expert, a producer, to come in and say, like, because who knows, like there might be things that it's like I think, oh, this would be impossible to shoot, but you might know a trick or something that's like, oh, this we could actually do that, this is feasible, we can cheat it or whatever. And then there's other things where it's like, whatever, I might think this is fine, and then you come in and you're like, wow, then no, like we can't do this, not with this budget. So yeah, I think it's to your point of like trusting people, it's just understanding that you bring your expertise, and then other people are going to bring other expertise, and just letting people do their jobs.
Well, and so much of it has to do with like a knowledge base of what actually costs money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like oftentimes screenwriters are like, yeah, we can't have explosions, that's too much money. And I'm like, explosions are cheap, man. Get a little bit of baking powder, and
Yep.
like,
yep, there it is.
How to build a bomb. Google's how to build a bomb.
I'm a writer, I promise.
Yeah.
So like, but I ran into that because the first piece, well, I guess I've written 2 things and then realized that I was a really bad writer. I produced both of them. But I think one of the things that I ran into in both those productions was I wrote it and was like, man, I have put a lot of effort and work into it. And then I started producing. Then I started directing. One of them I actually shot on my, shot as well. So I was all the creatives, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And what you find at that point is that you're sitting there, the back of your head, you're just like, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to keep going with this. And it just needs to get done. Because I've had this sitting here for so long.
Yeah.
And it just needs to get done. And the more people you pull into the creative space, the more you're actually slowed down, which gets really irritating. But like, as a producer, the screenwriter, if they go in and try to produce their own piece, they're just like, well, I've been working on this for 2 years.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to spend another 2 years of my life on this. And they're just like, this is overwhelming. I need this to be over and done.
Yeah. You've already like spent all of your creative energy. So it's like, yeah, the other creative things are suffering.
And so by the time you get to distribution, you're just like, I don't care who takes it. Right?
Yeah.
And that's just not at all how you should look at it.
No.
Yeah.
And so if you can figure out a great way to spread the love across the production so that you're not being taxed. That's why there are executive producers, associate producers, line producers, UPMs, all these people. They're there so that the executive producer, when it comes to distribution, isn't totally exhausted by going down and figuring out locations and, all these things. He or she, whatever, is able to maintain the relationships with the investors because that's super key. People don't realize how many times they go and get money and then forget to say thank you.
Oof.
And people walk in and, 10 years later, you come back and you want to, ask for money again. And they're just like, well, I didn't get said thank you to the first time.
Yeah.
I didn't even get a DVD of the film. I don't know where it is. And I made that mistake. I made that mistake with a set of investors. Thankfully, they are very gracious people and they still love me. And we're still great friends, even though that I was a total jerk. I took their money and then just, walked away.
Wow.
And there are things like that you have to be super careful with because you just don't know who's going to be your biggest fan.
That's really good.
You just don't.
Yeah.
And the reality is your biggest fan in funding is your biggest fan in distribution. And that's just like, that's a reality thing that we don't always think about. We don't think about the fact that your funding is your step-by-step goal to distribution.
Yeah.
It's your I tell people, I'm like, don't do crowdfunding for the funding aspect. And they're like, why would you do that? I'm like, because it's a great marketing campaign, don't waste it.
That's really true.
Because literally you're creating a fan base. But a fan base that wants to see the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't created a movie, you're not able to really give them what they want. Which is a product.
That's interesting.
Which is why things like board games and stuff work great on Kickstarter because there's already a product that can be delivered.
Yeah.
Films don't work great on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. When I say Kickstarter, I mean like everything.
Right.
Indiegogo, GoFundMe, all the crazy Give, Send, Go. One I just learned about, Salt Shaker Media has something. I forget what it's called.
Nice.
But it sounds kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's free.
Nice.
It is cool. I haven't looked into it either, but I saw that it is thing.
Well, they had the amazing little film reels at the squishy.
Oh, those were theirs?
Oh, nice.
See,
Yeah,
I
those
just
were theirs.
saw everybody squishing on them. Even my
Yeah.
sister had one. I didn't know where they were.
For those listening, I believe we're talking about handouts at the Christian Worldview Film Festival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good marketing tool, man. Everybody had those things,
Yeah.
basically.
They made the highlight reel.
That was partly because of a cute kid, but
Mostly
Fair
a
enough.
cute kid.
Fair enough.
Oh, number one, if you want to make a movie, have a cute kid. You can just like put their face over. It's like this
sort of,
little
but don't
kid.
work them longer than 6 hours.
Yes. Child labor laws.
Yes.
That, and it just doesn't go well after 6 hours.
Yeah.
Anyways, we've digressed.
Yes.
So funding is very unique.
Yeah.
Funding for years and years and years was the same across the board for everyone. They were either looking for donors
Mm-hmm.
or they were looking for investors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The great equalizer in those two, and a lot of people had this like secular sacred divide, right? Of like, well, if you're a donor, you're kind of this, you don't really care about the financial return. You just care about the, impact you're making.
Mm.
And an investor doesn't care about the impact you're making. He just cares about money return.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is absolutely not true at all.
Yeah.
So what an investor and what a donor care about are they care about impact overall. They care about impact overall. Impact is stated financially. Because if you're not being successful financially, period, donor or not, then what you're doing is you're just being a leech. So the same is true when it comes to crowdfunding, because really crowdfunding isn't anything new.
Mm-hmm.
It's just donors and or investors, depending on what part of crowdfunding you lie in. Because there's the whole investor crowdfunding thing that The Chosen and recently the Wingfeather Saga have been funded through. So there's the investor crowdfunding, which has technical terms, but it's easier explained that way.
Okay.
And then there's donor-based crowdfunding. So your Kickstarter, things like that. And that's a super simplification of it. I get it. If you actually do funding, they're like sitting over there pulling out their hair like this isn't right. But in layman's terms, that's how it splits. Like that's literally how it works. And so when you consider crowdfunding, the unique difference between crowdfunding and traditional funding methods is that you have a time constraint on your funding and you're going to lots of people to get that.
Right.
So a traditional funding method goes to anywhere from 1 to like 10 people, maybe 20 on like a large scale deal to find your funding.
Yeah.
So like a school is trying to do a $50 million project. Well, they're trying to reach out to, maybe 100 people that are willing to give $1 million. Whereas crowdfunding, you're trying to get, if you're trying to raise $1,000, you're trying to talk to literally somewhere in the 50,000 person range to be able to get them to give $10 amounts. Because basically the concept in funding is that 5% of your fan base is going to actually give to your production or be involved in your production in some way. So you have to talk to, it's nice when that 5% is the first people you talk to, but more than often than not, you're talking to 95% of your fan base and they're all like, no, talk to Jerry over here.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll give you the money. And, the 5% is not that way. So what people don't realize about crowdfunding is that it's a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you literally, your 5% is a lot more people than when you're talking about an investor situation.
Yeah. And especially it seems, especially if you're like getting started in film or you don't have much of a reputation or maybe you don't have that much, like you're literally starting from scratch and just like,
yeah,
literally trying to talk to 50,000 people. I was going to ask if you would talk a bit about, because like I've seen some people, like specifically YouTubers, do things like, filmmakers who are on YouTube who have like a fan base, like they have a decent subscriber amount, and they, are making consistent content. And then they'll say, okay, guys, we have this bigger project that we want to do. And they might use Kickstarter or something like that for a bigger project. But they kind of already have like some deliverables, in the sense of, like you were saying, Kickstarter is great marketing. So I guess in a sense they're kind of like marketing their YouTube channel and like stuff that already exists, and if people subscribe, then when the movie comes out they'll see it and all that. So anyway, could you kind of talk a little bit about that, like kind of the difference between someone starting from, no one like knows them, they haven't made anything, versus someone who already has an established audience using something like Kickstarter?
So Patreon's the other one that becomes common with like the YouTube crowd, right?
Yep.
So you build your Patreon group, and the Patreon group gives money to you, and then eventually you're able to use that money to do whatever you want to with.
Yeah.
And there's probably rules and regulations, and I just don't know. So the difference between having a fan base and not having a fan base is really where it comes down to. So like you walk into it, so straight across the board, fan base or not, 68% of Kickstarters fail.
Wow.
Which isn't a great number.
Yeah.
Not surprising.
Yeah, it's really bad. Like that's really bad stats.
Yeah.
But it's not unlike the number of, bad investments that occur. Investing is very rough. Like it's rough waters because you're taking a risk.
Yeah.
And so the thing with your Kickstarters and things like that is that no matter how much you try to use your already established fan base, you're still creating a fan base.
Okay.
Because even if you have a YouTube channel, right, and you have this fan base of 50,000 subscribers or whatever, let's say you have a decent sized fan base, they're hearing you all the time. And maybe you're saying subscribe or like or whatever all the time, and maybe they're doing that and maybe they're not, but they're there for a purpose, right? They're there for you in whatever way. They're there for a product.
Yeah.
But that product is handed to them on YouTube, so it's an episode that they'll appreciate. If you don't have that, you're really in the same boat as them, because you both haven't created a movie yet.
Right.
You both don't have the actual deliverable that the person's giving money to.
Right.
And so the thing about anything like that is a little bit more of an understanding of what it is. The struggle with Kickstarter, period, and Indiegogo, anything with a time constraint like that, the struggle is the time constraint itself, because it's got this like Christmas syndrome to it. Where if I told you, if I told you 30 days before Christmas, I got you this gift, and you're super excited about it, 30 days in, you're like, I really want this gift. But if I tell you in July that I got you this gift, and I hand it to you at Christmas, you've forgotten it at that point.
Yeah.
You don't care a hoot and a holler whether you gave $10 to it or not.
Yeah.
And so the struggle there, right, with like Kickstarter, the big key in any successful campaign that you watch, it's this: there's stretch goals, right? Well, if you haven't created a movie, you can't have stretch goals. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're telling them you're going to shoot more of a movie, like it just doesn't. Like stretch goals don't work with film. I've heard that multiple times. Stretch goals don't work with film. Not the case. Stretch goals work fantastic when you have a final product, because then you're able to add things like, hey, we have a t-shirt. If we do a stretch goal, we can release our devotional book alongside of it. Hey, if we do this, we can get, I don't know, plush toys. I don't, whatever
Action
it is,
figures.
more deliverable products.
Yeah.
I when I said plush toys, I was definitely looking over at Kyleel, who's sitting on my shelf. Anyway,
Amazing.
maybe. Anyway, VeggieTale's greatest plush toy.
Oh
Anyway,
my goodness.
so
VeggieTales.
so that being said, if you don't have a deliverable and you don't have products to go along with that deliverable, you're not gonna. Even if you get the money, you're not gonna feel successful
Mm.
in your Kickstarter because all your user base and your fan base is very disappointed because they
Yeah.
didn't get it delivered to them at a
Yeah.
time when. And you're building hype prematurely.
Yeah.
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 So
Okay.
I don't know. That's where I struggle with it because
Yeah.
I see it more as a use case in distribution and
Mhm.
funding as a marketing campaign, which is what all the production companies that are doing things like video, computer games or board games or I don't know, selling a watch of some sort. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're using it as a marketing campaign. They're not trying to actually fund. They might be trying to fund a little bit of their production cost,
Yeah.
but they're not actually using it as a funding goal. They've already put in all their time and effort in creating the product
Yeah.
and a prototype of some sort, and they've gotten that money somewhere. Either they have a job of their own, or they've gotten some sort of a research grant or something crazy. And so they're just using it as a marketing and distribution on the back end instead of what people commonly call it as a funding thing.
Yeah, that's really
yeah.
interesting. That's a really good idea, and that's kind of like, now I'm kind of like, well, if you've already made it and you already have all the money, why are you just trying to like take more money? But like that can help, like you said, fund more product, and also like help you just have more on the table to like pay back your investors, to pay for distribution costs. And I mean, films don't always make all the money that it takes to actually
and I think
make up.
Oftentimes we walk in there and our goals, everybody complains like, well, yeah, they got a digital fist bump for $1. That wasn't very satisfying at all. I have to give like $50, right, to get anything out of this. That's always a struggle on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever, because everybody walks on there and like, well, I was going to give like $20, but in order to get anything worthwhile, I've got to give like 100.
Yeah.
If you use it more in the context of a marketing / distribution, really marketing, it doesn't really get into distribution, but a marketing campaign.
Yeah.
It allows you to build street cred for your movie because people were interested.
Yeah.
It allows you to create some level of budget for marketing if you don't already have that. You should be budgeting for that beforehand. Half your budget should be for marketing.
Wow.
Yeah.
But that aspect of it, right, is just it's building a fan base and a structure for your film. Even if you already have it, it's engaging that fan base.
Yeah.
Because really, like the success of The Chosen, the reason why it works is because they put in a ton of work on their crowdfunding campaign, and they built this structural platform that's literally carried them through. Wing Feather's going to be very similar, and they have an engaged model in which they keep bringing people back.
Yeah.
Because even with the investor crowdfunding model that they use, they fund it, right? Someone gives them money, and then they get, I think their number is 120%. So you get what you gave and then 20% above that.
Wow.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a fairly good investment rate, but it's small amounts. So it's like $1,000 kind of deal.
Yeah.
So they get a ton of people to do this, right? But once you've given that amount, right, and then you're getting that back, maybe, let's say season 1 came out, I think, 8 months after the initial funding goal was completed or something like that. It didn't take very long for them to deliver. Like a year's not, like that's a normal investment term. So if you walk into it as an investment, they have different expectations than if you walk into it as a donor, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
Because a donor, you're giving them money, and then it's like, well, you should just be seeing success, like because I should be seeing this success because I don't have to see money as much. I'm just seeing success, right?
Yeah. Yeah.